to the World Lens podcast, where we look at what's happening around the world each week through a global business lens. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, digital specialist at the World Trade Center Institute, and I'm here today with Bruce McIndoe, president of McIndoe Risk Advisory and WTCI board member. So, Bruce, today we're going to be talking about a topic that you actually suggested.
Yep.
We're going big on climate change. So there are a handful of stories in the news right now that I'd like to discuss, to kind of focus in on this conversation. But first, I want to ask, why is climate change one of the things you wanted to talk about?
As a long time risk forecaster, and actually back in when I worked at NASA, worked quite a bit in mission Planet Earth, right? So turning our sensors on our own home and starting to monitor what's going on, and of course the whole crazy ozone hole and all the things. And then, we were going to enter a winter phase, and then that switched to, oh no, we're going to get hot. So it's climate research has gone through bumps in the last 30, 40 years. But anyway, so it's a love of mine. I've been talking about climate change probably for the last 12 to 15 years.
Wow.
And what concerns me, having been an observer and a scientist, is kind of all the levers that we said are bad are being pulled, right? Increasing ocean temperatures and on and on. So it's obviously of global impact, and it's going to substantially alter the lives of probably 3 to 4 billion people on this planet. So that's why I take it seriously.
I'm right there with you. I am all about it. I mean, things have been pretty bad. Incredibly hot summers, really cold winters, really bad storms. But beyond those things, is the data really trending really poorly right now?
So, anytime you are in this and you look at trending data, there's like natural cycles, whether it's the sun, the earth, El Nino and Nina, that go on. And so when these cycles kind of like, get into, like, let's say resonance, where you have two or three things at the same time, then you can create, horrible things, right? So we have this underlying trend line of, yes, like, for example, let's say ocean warming, right? That's going, so the baseline is going up. And then you have things like El Nino, where you have, Pacific Ocean warming that's secular. And then you have, El Nino when it's cooling. And so it's not a straight line, right? It's going to be, when El Nino is there, it's additive. And so, it's getting really hot. And then El Nino comes in. Oh, okay, now it's not so hot, but the average is still higher, right? You have that constant march. And so that's essentially, what we're dealing with, is that we have these systems, and we don't fully understand how all the systems actually interact with each other. We have the polar reversal that's happened, so all kind, so how does all this reinforce or impact the others as an overall system? I don't think we have those answers, but what we do see is the trend lines, and the trend lines are not in the direction that we want.
Right. There's a big story in the news recently about really heavy rainfall in the United Arab Emirates. They said it was like the largest rainfall in 75 years. Some areas received like up to 10 inches of rain within 24 hours. And Dubai, in particular, received around 4 inches of rain in just 12 hours, which is normally what they receive in an entire year.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are they dealing with all of this massive rainfall?
Well, they're not, right? I was actually on a webinar, I guess it was a Monday, and the fellow couldn't make it into his office, so he called in from his car. Now, luckily, he had a driver, but he was in the back seat on his phone to join the webinar, to be on the panel, and he showed us like around the car, and it's like the cars slowly moving through this river, which was like the main road in
Oh,
Dubai, and you could see buses and cars and stuff that are all just like
just
out there. It
floating.
looked like in a massive pond, and so
Wow.
it's so it's pretty crazy. But so it's a complicated situation. It's a complicated situation here for a lot of the countries that do not have a history of this kind of rainfall. It was a conscious decision. It's like, okay, we're not going to spend, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars on rainwater drainage in a
Right, that we
city
may not
that
get.
basically doesn't see any kind of, and yeah, so if there is a heavy, let's say 1 inch or an inch and a half or 2 inches, and then there's some flooding, it'll subside in a day or two, and
Hmm.
we'll push on, right? So it's the same thing in where I'm in Washington D.C. Washington D.C. was built on essentially swampland, right? And
Hmm.
there's all kinds of aquifers and underwater, underground, essentially rivers or streams, but Washington is rapidly sinking in the grand scheme of things, 1.5 or 2.5 centimeters per year, and
Right.
but eventually it's gonna keep going down, and so, and this is one of Baltimore, where you are, right? Is also
Hmm.
on the list, like most of the East Coast cities, New York City, all of them. So
Yeah.
as sea levels rise, it further calls that that subsistence underneath, and then that land compresses, and we're essentially all kind of most coastlines are going to be impacted, where cities, and I know there's in China, I remember seeing a video of a city where the road was all buckled up and everything, because it was rapidly, it was something like 5 or 10 centimeters per year that this city was sinking. It was crazy. So yeah, welcome to climate change.
Maybe we all need to move farther inland.
Well, we'll probably
Midwest.
talk about that in a minute.
So, looking at a place like Dubai, where, like you
Mm,
mentioned, like the city is not built for it because they don't need the infrastructure because it rarely rains.
right.
But do you think they'll start adding in some ways to deal with it, even though it only happened 75 years ago?
So there'll be immediate response. So for example, people who had like basement areas flooded, or had equipment in basements that got damaged, so they're going to look
Hmm.
at this and say, okay, I don't want that to happen again, right? So they're going to either move the equipment or seal up the basement area so that it's not going to flood, right? And we saw this in Fukushima, right, with the tsunami. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so there'll be those immediate things, but to drain off, a major roadway or something like that, no, I don't think that's anything Dubai's going to hop on right now. With this, once in 75 years. But if there is, clear data to say, okay, this is actually not a one-time event. We're going to start dealing with this on a regular basis, or we actually deal with it on a regular basis, then people will get off
Mm-hmm.
their seats and do something about it. Like in New
Yeah.
Orleans and elsewhere, they'll probably do a lot of things with pumps where they can move the water more quickly
Mm-hmm.
versus building a lot of infrastructure. Probably be the next phase.
So, infrastructure for these once in a lifetime events. It seems like it's a good business opportunity for someone to come in and say, "Hey, my company can help you with these things."
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw that, with Sandy when it hit New York, right?
Right.
So and there are companies that are clean the mess up companies, right? The
Hmm.
challenge is you don't have the continuous work to support that. On they either have to travel far and wide to go find the problems, or they're going to sit around and have a lot of equipment that's idle because I'm not using it all the time. So that's the challenge with that kind of business, right? It's very episodic. Where the long term business is, we're going to lose between 500,000 and I don't know 800,000 structures in the next 60
Ooh,
years along, the US coastline. So if you think about the East Coast, Florida, Louisiana especially, um, Florida, so Florida and Louisiana actually the two highest risk areas. Those
yeah,
people, those structures are going to go away, and those people are going to need to move somewhere, and they need structures to move into, right? So
right.
so I think when we start seeing more and more of that, there'll be lots of opportunity for modular home construction and that kind of infrastructure. That'll be a busy business.
Yeah. So, who would you say is leading the way in either working to prevent climate change with like electric vehicles or renewable tech, or to mitigate conditions that are caused by climate change?
So again, I'm involved in a number of industries. For example, in the
Mm-hmm.
travel industry, right? They take a lot of heat because they generate a lot of heat. um, just if you look at it, a tracking map of all the airplanes that are running around the globe right now, it's amazing, right? Just so much. I think it's something like 3% of greenhouse gas or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that industry is making huge investments in what they call SAF, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sustainable aviation fuel, right? To substantially cut emissions from aircraft, right? So we see that also, like in hotels, the rental companies, made a big push on building a fleet of EVs. Except no, well, not no one, but a lot fewer people were willing to rent EVs, right? Because it's like, okay, they're fun for like going around the city, and I have confidence that I can plug it in if I need to, but I don't know if the hotel is going to have a place where I can plug it in, and then I don't want that. I'm just going to go with the regular car and not have to deal with all that worry, right? And so they're actually, shedding off some of their EV inventory because just it's not getting used, right? And hotels, again, water, power, a lot of the like little amenities and things now. They now have bulk, shampoo and soap and that kind of stuff,
Right.
and so really trying to cut down on their contribution. So I think we're seeing this. A lot of manufacturers are doing recyclable water, so they're
Mm.
they're reusing the water. Um, and but again, it's important and incremental but insufficient. And
Yeah.
but one of the things that I saw, I guess it was last year, that piqued my interest. The FDA approved manufactured chicken meat.
Yeesh.
Well, you can say eek, right? And that's the hard problem. Is this is essentially cultured. This is the same cells that are in chicken, the same format that is in chicken. So
Mm-hmm.
when you take this quote unquote manufactured chicken and put it side by side taste tests, it would be impossible for you to tell the difference because it's the same, right?
Interesting.
Right. And so this concept of like being able to manufacture protein versus on the hoof or on the chicken feet, right? um, could change the whole trajectory of, I think it's 11% of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by livestock farming worldwide,
Wow.
right? And if you think about it, we haven't changed those practices since time immemorial. Matter of fact, most of our farming practices haven't changed in
Right.
human history, right? Just fertilizer and some automation. So the
Mm-hmm.
concept of being able to produce protein in a manufactured environment and deliver that is huge. And so some of those things give me great promise. I also
Mm-hmm.
see companies like Siemens and others that are building contained farms, right? So they can produce in like a 5-acre farm what might be 100 acres of field farming, right? So this would be hydroponic and aeroponic farming structures. They can
Mm-hmm.
be a large 5 acre, growing area, or they can actually go vertical. And they
I
actually,
was about to say that, like
yeah,
Bowery Farms,
yeah,
they
exactly.
do vertical farming.
Right. So now you can start, farm to table now could take on a whole new meaning if I can actually put these structures close to a major city and
Mm-hmm.
produce, the food and those kinds of things, and then deliver it right there. You're going to cut transportation emissions, water consumption, because a lot of these are, again, recycling, more efficient use of and control of fertilizer, so it's not running into streams and rivers. So when I see these, and I actually see them start to getting to scale, and
Mm-hmm.
think about the challenges that we're going to have on the planet for some areas, especially in Africa and elsewhere, where without this, it may even be not livable, right?
Yeah. Got to think about the grand scheme of things, not just where we are.
Hmm.
So, sticking with the business theme, are there any particular industries or fields that you see that are doing particularly well? You know, you mentioned kind of how the hotels aren't doing like the small bottles anymore.
Hmm.
I noticed that actually on a recent hotel stay, they had just like full bottles of like hand soap, shampoo, conditioner, lotion instead
Yeah.
of the small
Stuck to the
bottles.
wall,
And
so you don't take it.
yeah, I thought it was strange,
Mm-hmm.
but saying what you just said, it kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, you
Yeah.
know,
So, I when I think about, I always think about those, basic needs, right? And
mhm.
so, water, food, shelter, warmth, and I really feel like as this, takes hold. And so when we talk about this in kind of forecasting, we talk about, the middle earth, right? So if you take
Mhm.
that band around the planet that's 20 degrees north and south of the equator, is what we call middle earth. That's where all the big action is going to be, where it, depending on the arc of where we get to, could be very difficult to live in, or impossible to have humans living there without augmentation, right? So
Mhm.
aircon, going underground, farming in these, farm towers, those kinds of things, water production. So, but if you think about that, it says, okay, well, where do those people go? Well, they're going to migrate, right? So how do
Mhm.
you find housing, and how do you feed them and provide support for them if they have to move north or south? Well, south is not on this planet very hospitable, right? Unless you want to live,
Right.
in the water. So really, it's a northern migration, right? And I remember probably 15 years ago telling people, if you want to make a place a long-term bet, buy some farmland in Canada, right? And
Hmm.
that'll be a good 30 to 60 year bet as things change. And I was reading an article last year that, when I was in the UK, that the champagne grape growers in France have now been purchasing and growing grapes in the UK, because that's how much the
Interesting.
climate has changed, right? So, we're living these things today. So yeah, so food, energy, water. There's a great company called Hydroloop that builds water recycle programs for homes, and as well as businesses and communities. And
Mhm.
just those kinds of things are going to just become more and more important. I think right now we have a lot of people that are feeling it. In
Yeah.
another 5 years, people are going to be like panicking, and like, we need to start doing big things now. And so I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of growth and a lot of pressure and a lot of redirection of wealth into a lot of the things that I was just talking about.
So I know that like every couple months there's a new like bombshell report that we are doing horrible at hitting our climate goals. Is I mean, I'm not even gonna say is that really the case because we're seeing the
True.
effects,
Yeah.
but you know, what more can be done than what's happening?
I think at the last climate conference, I think most of the delegates were asking that very question, like how do we get nations and their citizens to, it's like no one nation, no 100 million people can make, it's got to be like a concerted, effort
Hmm.
that's multiplied by everyone on the planet, right? Everyone on the planet is
Yeah.
contributing to the problem, and everyone on the planet, by doing their share, can help. And that was, I think, really the model when we did the first, like, where do
Hmm.
we need to be? The problem is the rich nations and developing nations are not, they're contributing, you know, as much or worse.
Hmm.
And the people that have nots, that are just subsistence living and probably the most ecologically efficient people on the planet, are suffering the most, right? So
Right.
yeah, so there was no good answer coming out of COP. A lot of, I think one of the things that I think came out when I was looking at it is focus, right? And kind of
Hmm.
back what I was saying, could we focus on livestock production, right? And then the blowback was, well, that's all well and good at the numbers level, but for billions of people, that's their livelihood,
Right.
right? So how do you say, okay, we're not going to raise goats and cows and chickens and stuff anymore, we're going to do these, we're going to manufacture all this stuff. Well, what happens then? So that kind of problem. When you look at housing and those kinds of things, it's like, okay, well, where's the capital going to come from to do that, right? 'Cause,
Right.
like, once it's there, it's great, but have putting the capital together to actually produce those housing units, that kind of thing. So there's always just this constant, chicken and egg and decision problem about what are the known impacts, let alone the unintended consequences, right?
Right.
And I think that it's a very difficult, challenging problem that is going to take a lot of money. And right now, the richest nations, if you start looking at the US and EU as an aggregate, and then rising, India and risen China, um, if those countries and unions can come together under pressure, probably, then we can probably start making some headway. But right now, it's slow go.
I read an article that was saying, was it 57 companies are a big chunk of greenhouse gas emissions.
Hmm.
And, is there a way for them to stay profitable and still produce less greenhouse gas?
So, when I've looked at some of these industries, and a growing one is the AI industry, right? If you look at the amount of energy and that these and heat that these that are producing, it's pretty fantastic. And some of them are talking about building, nuclear power plants with these small modular reactors to power their data centers, right? Which is okay in time. So they're recognizing, that they've got to change their model.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Bottling companies, like Coca-Cola and people like Pepsi and stuff like that, they're understanding, that they can be more conserving of water and those kinds of things. When you think about, they extract water and then they create their product and ship it out, right? And so how do you contribute back and kind of replenish that aquifer and not just completely deplete it over time? And so a lot of companies that I see out there are taking it very seriously, and still making a profit. So and and for a lot of these companies, it's also not just them, it's the whole community, right? I mean, if they go into Arizona and pump out all the groundwater, and then nobody else has any water to live by, that's not a good steward, right?
The Paris Agreement was seen as a major stepping stone in aligning states in one direction, but there are a lot of deviations and missing targets since it was signed.
Mm.
Any chance we'll see an update or revision to it anytime soon?
So my experience is no, not in any time soon. But if it comes back again to this like pressure, right? That it's building, and
Hmm.
I don't think it's going to be too far off that everyone's going to have to take notice of this, focus on it, and start having some more aggressive solutions,
Hmm.
and then that's when these will be attended to. But until then, I don't see the will.
So I don't want to end without, trying for a little bit of optimism. Is there
Sure.
any climate change related topics that you're feeling really positive about?
So when I look at the technology spectrum of what is actually functioning today, just maybe not at scale,
Hmm.
I'm seeing unbelievable opportunities to solve climate change issues on this planet, from energy storage to energy production. I was looking at technology of hydrogen energy, energy that you know for example, in the 1930s, 30% of vehicles on the roads in the United States were EVs.
Really?
The first EV, the first battery was like 1890 or something like that. The first EV vehicle was like, I don't know, 1920 or something, right? And that was
Did not know.
that wasn't a rechargeable battery, right? They would go into a barn, they would take out that rack of batteries, they put a new set of batteries in, and you would drive off. And then when it became rechargeable, the same thing, they would charge them up, but they would put it in, you'd go in a few minutes, and then they would recharge it and use it in another vehicle because they had a standard form factor. 30%. What happened? In the late 1930s, gas powered engines came on the scene,
Hmm.
right? And powered World War II and took all the EVs off the road, right? Because it was a more reliable and easier to deal with energy. So we could sit here right now, and we may see in another, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, hydrogen fuel powered engines, right? That could just completely like disrupt the whole thing, right? So
Yeah.
so when I look at all of what's going on in robotics and in automation and in energy, I am actually very optimistic that we have
Yeah.
humans are very resilient and very innovative, and especially when you think around food production and all the things I talked
Hmm.
about with water recycling and water production.
Hmm.
I really feel like we're gonna have the tools that we need. Again, it's the will and the financing to make it happen, right?
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yep.
Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today. And of course, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure you follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. See you next week.